It is always about what does the music do to the scene, not how does the music sound. So I suppose I should start by saying I'm probably a kind of accidental film composer. I probably wanted to write and direct, and I had done some writing and directing, and I started off making films with Lenny Abrahamson and Ed Guiney, and uh, they have obviously both gone on to uh, have great and auspicious careers. But I I was just able to kind of like back 35, 40 years ago when we were making short films, we were doing it on 16 mil, and I had access to a recording studio. So a whole load of people who were trying to make films back then in Ireland when there was very little stuff being made and there was absolutely no government support for any of this stuff. We, I was the guy who did the scores. That was just it. But I wasn't. I didn't know I was good at it. I just did it, and I mean, I still don't know if I'm good at it. I'm successful, but I don't know if I'm good at it. So in a way, my background is more filmmaking than. At the same time, I was playing in bands, and I had grown up in a family. I have three brothers. We all played musical instruments. We were all so I assumed everybody could write music. That was the thing that all, and because I was surrounded by friends and people who were creative, and some were musicians or whatever, I didn't think it was a thing that anyone would ever pay you to do, or you know. So I originally started. I originally studied architecture. Did 3 years of that. Uh, Left because I love architecture far too much to become an architect, and um, there's a story in that as well. But obviously, that's a leading statement. Um, um, and then I played in bands and was trying to make film because film was always the thing I was interested in.
Hmm.
And I think probably, when I was a kid living in Ireland, especially, we got, because of the proximity of Ireland to the UK, we got the BBC was broadcast to Northern Ireland, which was part of the UK. And living on the east coast of Ireland, we got it as well. It was free to air, so we just got the BBC. So we only had two terrestrial channels in Ireland then, which were both really miserable, which went off a lot of Catholic church stuff on them, a lot of, at 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock, there'd be church bells when you're supposed to pray for the Angelus, which was weird being a Protestant. But it was a very strange environment to grow up in with any kind of desire to be involved in the arts, because it was a really grim landscape for stuff like that. There was no funding of the arts at all. Any Irish person back then who did well left. They went away, and so BBC Two then used to broadcast really great films, and I remember you would, particularly the films of Nicholas Roeg, who did Don't Look Now, Walkabout, um, and just these really strange films that were like this other world. And any kind of French film. I also bizarrely loved musicals, Hollywood musicals, because that's what they showed on a Saturday afternoon matinee on the BBC. So, like Singing in the Rain, all of that stuff. All of that stuff that was supposed to kind of make you feel happy and suggest this other citadel on the hill that existed in America, which worked on everybody, you know? It was a real, it was probably one of the biggest not calling cards, but advertising hoardings for the States was obviously Hollywood, and how Hollywood got into everybody's homes all across the world. Um, so for some reason, film was always a thing that myself and Lenny and Ed wanted to be involved in, because it was something that was, it was exotic, it was another world, and the idea that you could make something like what you saw, which I suppose also comes with a certain amount of self confidence, thinking, well, why couldn't we do that? Why couldn't we make something like that? Why couldn't. And it's similar in a way with doing scores. I would always kind of think, well, I'm not, my music theory isn't great. I don't write music well or whatever. As in, I'm not able to just write it out, but I have music in my head, and therefore, why not? Why not have a go at it? Why not? All that can happen is you fail. And yeah, so that's kind of the impetus possibly for the beginning of the journey.
Well, it's interesting you say that you originally wanted to be a filmmaker, as in like a director, because when I listen to some of your projects, like it feels like you create music as a director in a way. Like you let the characters be the characters and like you give them space with your music. Like there's some music composers that it's overwhelming and in good ways sometimes, but I feel like with the way you compose, it really feels like you are adding color to the characters in a way that's very subtle.
Yeah, I guess you see, it when people say I'm a composer, I kind of push back a little bit, and it's not just semantics because I say, well, actually, I write music for film
Mm.
because I see myself as a filmmaker still, and actually, and it is that collaborative process. And luckily, I've worked with people who are very collaborative, and so I don't think. I mean, sometimes I'll hear things I've done, or I will. There's a particular style of stuff which comes more easily to me, but I think I can write probably in any style because it depends what the film needs and depends what the scene needs. And when I'm talking to younger people who want to do what I do, I'm always saying, and especially people who come from maybe the background of being in a band or whatever, is to say, look, if you're listening to your music, you're failing. If you're playing your music in a scene and you're listening, you shouldn't be listening, you should be watching. That's
Mm.
really what it is. And you want to see how does this emotionally change the scene. Really, and I alluded to it when we chatted the other day, that idea that if you're thinking, oh, this is a really beautiful piece, and I can imagine this doing really well on the original soundtrack when it comes out, and I'm going to get loads of hits on Spotify, whatever, you will end up definitely with a reputation for somebody who thinks that the music is more important,
Mm.
and maybe not doing very well because ultimately you're not doing your job, which is to be the music is there like the costume and the scenery and the acting, and it's a part of the overall thing. And it's you have to have an ego, you have to be quite emotionally robust in filmmaking because you're having to be creative to a deadline, and that can sometimes lead to kind of a certain kind of fraught um, and very tense set of circumstances. Um, but it's yeah, for me, it is always about what does the music do to the scene, not how does the music sound. I've listened. I've got a couple of absolute banger cues that are fantastic, that are kind of like, and I don't know what I'm saving them for, but the thing is, they came about through trying to solve problems with a cue, and they weren't right. And
Mm.
the reason they weren't right is because they're much too good. And I don't mean too good objectively. I just mean they had a kind of beauty to the melody or something which takes away from the scene or takes you out. You start listening to the music. And of course that's useful sometimes if that's what the music has to do.
Hmm.
But you don't want the music to distract. The music has to attract you in and pull you more into the scene and the characters. And sometimes you do that by doing very, very little and trying to stay out of the way.
That makes me think about like the point in the process that you come on board. Do you come on board, and maybe this varies project to project, but do you come on board before it's shot? Do you get the scripts before production, or do you come on post production when you have a cut in front of you?
It really varies. the standard thing would be like now I would get, there would be an availability check for me. And if I was available for a certain slot or whatever, I would then ask to read the script or the synopsis or whatever, just to see if it's the kind of thing. I mean, more than anything else, if it's the kind of thing that I don't want to do,
Mm.
because I don't really want to do stuff which is just. I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I don't have to do stuff to pay the rent that I don't want
Hmm.
to do so far. So I don't really want to do really cynical, killing, like just cheesy, crappy, exploitative. Just there's too much of it. There's just too much of it. And similarly, I don't really want to do big Hollywood films. I've no interest. And I don't mean that like Hollywood is a bit of a kind of generalization, but a certain type of big blockbuster film that just, I don't know, it just doesn't interest me. Because I think, at this stage in my life, every project I work on probably is 6 months to a year, which
Hmm.
is a huge percentage of the rest of my working life. So actually, I'm living with those characters. I'm living with, working with the people who were on it, collaborating, and you kind of share a life in a way for a certain amount of time with those people, even if it's remotely. And so I kind of, it's about, you kind of feel it out. You will read the script, and if I like the script, I kind of go. I mean, normally if the script is really good, it's a bit terrifying because you kind of think, oh, it can only go downhill from here. Um, but you never. I've never worked on a project where it gets. You can't make a good film out of a bad script. I just don't think. I just don't. You can make a bad film out of a good script, obviously. So it's a really interesting process to see, and I love that thing, especially with some of the directors who I know well, who I've worked with, like Lenny or Paddy Brannock, who I've done a few things with. It's how the whole project will morph and change from seeing the script, then seeing it be populated by actors and the characters develop, and then when the DOP comes on board and then they light it and you start to see it all evolve. And in a way, the most exciting thing is when at the end of it, you have no idea what it is.
Hmm.
It's the most exciting. I remember being in Toronto with Room, and we all watched it. The premiere was in Toronto, and we watched it, and we had no idea what it was before we showed it. Like, it's hard to explain that, but that's really exciting. And it's a real sign that it's good, because it means it's kind of alive. It has its own character at that stage, which you have helped. It's like our job is to make the script the best shape it can possibly be all the time. And you refine it and you change it and you try different cues and you try different, and recuts, picture cuts and different things. And eventually you end up with something where you kind of think, look, this is the way it has to be. It's inevitable. So, and a lot of that is only possible if you're working in independent film, because you're the budgets aren't so big. There's not so much at stake. You probably don't have funders or distributors who are trying to get their paws all over it and think, well, you know, it needs more sex, or it needs a happy ending, or whatever, whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting hearing you say that about Room because I mean you are working with the cut to create music, right? So it's like for you, someone so close to the end of making the film, how going to see it is still quite a surprise to you. That's really awesome and cool to me.
Yeah, because it's also you're watching with an audience for the first time,
Hmm.
and so you kind of like. I remember the first time. So at that screening in Toronto, the editor Nathan Nugent was sitting beside me, and beside Nathan was my agent, Rafe Birchall, who's also a good friend. And we were watching it, and I started to notice various people around me, kind of shuffling and sniffling and taking out hankies, and I kind of thought, oh, that now. And Rafe is a kind of London, a kind of he's not like he's very urbane London character. And I thought I heard him yawning at one stage, and I remember I nudged Nathan and said, "Yeah, Rafe isn't really enjoying this, is he?" And Nathan just leaned over and said, "What did he say?" He said something like I think he's having a nervous breakdown or something. I can't remember because he was in floods. He was in floods of tears,
Oh.
and so you have this really, and then you kind of go, "Wow." Like it's actually affecting people because you're surrounded suddenly in an audience by people who haven't lived with this thing for the last year, who haven't seen it progress, see the cuts change or whatever. And it's a
Mhm.
really exciting thing because you kind of go, all these people, and they kind of seem to be getting it at the same place. And it's like a confirmation that certain instincts were right. And they don't always land. Like Lenny made a really beautiful film called The Little Stranger. And it just wasn't marketed right. It was kind of marketed as a kind of psychological horror film or something. And it just was none of that. And it's absolutely beautiful. And people didn't really get to see it.
Mm.
And so it's that thing. Whereas with normal people, everybody got to see normal people because everyone had COVID or was in lockdown. And
Yeah.
everyone wants a lovely, simple story of boy meets girl and whatever. So it caught a wave. And it was good enough to catch the wave.
Yeah.
But there was a huge amount of luck involved in that. And often there are great films that don't ever get seen. And unfortunately, there are really crap films that get seen a lot. But that's the nature of it.
I mean, just to your point about normal people, you were talking about your preference on types of projects, and watching that. I've watched that series multiple times, but the first time watching it, it felt like every episode was an independent film,
Yeah.
and I had never really seen a show that did that for me. Like it was like the first show that I was like, this is like the coolest show ever, just because of the feeling you left with it. Like the
Well,
and yeah.
yeah. And what's interesting is like that's a huge it takes a huge leap of faith by the funders, by the BBC, by um, various funders to kind of go, because Lenny had final cut on that as well. Now Lenny
Mm.
had built up a reputation with Room and with various other films, but it's quite rare these days to have for the director to have final cut, and especially with something like that where he, as you say, he made TV kind of cinematic, but that's everything that goes against all of the kind of the kind of given standards of TV, where it gets faster and faster cutting. Now you have to keep people involved, and you can't really have silences, and a lot of normal people is silence and wistful looks, and but you can't, wistful looks won't work unless the acting is really good, and the
Right.
acting won't be really good unless the writing is really good. And so everywhere along the line, it has to be really good, because otherwise, it's only when you see stuff that isn't very good, you see two people looking at each other and you just don't believe it. And you don't even know, it's very hard to work out why it is you don't believe it, but you just don't. And it just comes down to that. It either works or it doesn't. Do you believe it? Do you
Yeah.
believe that these two people are? Have we stopped seeing Daisy Edgar Jones and Paul Mescal, and are we seeing Marianne and Connell? Because if you're seeing the two actors, you're failing as a director, you're failing as a composer, you're failing, and all of those things are failing. So all the craft has to come together to create that amazing frisson between these two people, and the pain, and the pain, and to deal with something as elemental as being in love with somebody, and the pain of that and the joy of that and the longing of that and how it, in such a lovely way, and all the sex scenes, if you're doing a thing where you're kind of have a camera on two teenagers, one of whom this is their first time. That involves such skill to do it in a way which is not prurient or exploitative or and to actually make it so you could sit down with your teenage kids and watch it and kind of go, I hope your first time is like this. Because, the world is so pornified now that to actually see something done like that is really, it's really lovely. I had the bizarre thing of becoming completely oblivious to what I was writing scenes for. So the scene where they have sex for the first time, it's about 5 minutes, and I'm writing music for it. And
Mm.
various people will come in and out of my studio, and there'd be this scene on the thing, and and they just come in, and I'd be chatting to them, and it was only after a while I'd realize that they're kind of going, "What are you doing? What are you watching? What I shouldn't, And then I just go, oh yeah, no, this is what I'm doing, and it's all okay. They're not actually teenagers. And it was kind of, yeah, it was interesting. But again, I suppose on normal people, from my point of view, I just had to stay out of the way. I had to stay out of the way of it, and to be really gentle with the music, because really there is so much gentleness in normal people. They're both gentle characters, although the Marianne character is in many ways much stronger, much more um, knows herself more, I think, than the Connell character does. But the music had to be, um, I don't know what words, it had to be the way it ended up being. That's the only way I can say it.
It's interesting, like, and I'm not just saying this because you're on here, but like the album for Normal People is one of those scores that I play all the time, just randomly in life, and it's has this really magical way of like bringing color into whatever I'm experiencing at the time, whether that be like moving out of my childhood home or like a breakup, and it just like I find it really beautiful because it applies so well to normal people, but I also think it applies very well to people just experiencing life in general. And so I'm curious, for normal people going into creating that music, did you think deeply about the characters, or was it an essence you were trying to achieve? Like, what was your thought process while creating that?
um, I mean, I can't remember specifically. I'm sure I have notes somewhere, but really, it's much more immediate than that. It's not really an intellectual. It's watching the scene, and it's
Mm.
about kind of feeling what's going on there and talking to Lenny and trying to work out. I'm kind of going, look, this is what's happening for me. There's a frustration here. Connell is afraid to ask her, can I stay with you? Can I stay for the summer? Whatever it is, but he doesn't say it. And I suppose remembering stuff like that, being a version of him when I was younger, and somehow projecting that somehow through then starting to play with certain sounds or notes or whatever that seemed to, like, lots of trial and error, lots of trying to, there's no kind of go, oh, I know what that is, and I'll just do it. If that happens, there's kind of something wrong in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I think people often think that when I'll come into an editing suite and people will play me a film, and I kind of go, oh yeah, I know exactly what you need here, and I'll give it to you. Like, it's much more terrifying than that. It's actually
Mm-hmm.
kind of going, oh, I've no idea. But let me take it home and let me, with terror, try a few things. And then you get sucked into it. And then you start trying. And sometimes you try something which you think is completely wrong. So you think of a German a tuba band or something, and you play it against a love scene, ridiculous and absurd, but you do it and it does something. And then you kind of go, what is it doing? Why does it suddenly make it feel like comedy? Why does it do this? What if I put the Jaws soundtrack against it? What does that do in a love scene? What does and it's actually a lot of it is, and I think a lot of the best work and the best film is gathering all your materials that you think have value and then trying to arrange them in the nicest possible way. Because I often think a script is like that. If you think about what a script does, maybe it covers 10 years of a person's life. And yet, every now and then there's an exchange between a couple of people. You're only ever seeing the very peak of the mountain of somebody's, a week in a year. And it still amazes me that cinema works as effectively as it does because it is really just dealing in headlines. Literature is so much more precise. You can tell, you can write down and describe to the reader what the person is thinking, what they're feeling, what their film is much more prescriptive. And so to try and make it less prescriptive, sometimes you have to make it foggy or misty or less literal or and yet tap into a common language which we think we all have, which is even comes down to if it's sad you play minor and if it's happy you play major, it is stuff like that. And we're both speaking English, so we have a certain understood vocabulary and way of thinking, and we have to make some of those assumptions with cinema as well and music. I can't even remember what you asked me, but I don't even know if you asked me anything. I think I just started talking.
No, I know it's great. I mean, I write a lot, and for me, routine is really important for that, as I'm sure it probably is for music too. You have to sit down, you have to make yourself do it. But sometimes I find that my best ideas come when I'm like running or driving or like doing something that I'm not totally thinking about it. So I'm curious, for you making music, are you just ever in the car and you're like, oh, that's what I need to do?
Uh, yeah, it's a version of exactly that. And I used to, so I have a theory about this, which is that the best ideas come when you're thinking about something else. So I used to do that when I can't run at the moment because I'm injured, but when I'd be running, I would run, I would start counting, and I'd count and I'd count, and eventually it would become like a meditation. And all I'd be thinking about was the pains in my body. I'd be very aware of my body pounding the thing whenever. And so that kind of liberates, I think. It means the brain or the mind or whatever, wherever that creative voice is, kind of has to get turned off for a while because all the effort is going into not falling over or not running into things or making sure you don't get spotted barfing or vomiting on the side of the road because you've whatever it is all going on. And I think then suddenly I will start to have really nice ideas.
Hmm.
When I'm trying to concentrate on running, I start to have nice ideas. Now, funnily enough, I don't be, that very thing is why I actually don't have very strict hours when I write. So what
Hmm.
I will often do is I'll during the kind of normal working hours, I'll do stuff that I might be mixing or checking cues and but the writing I tend to do very late at night when I probably should be asleep or at weekends when everybody else is off having a nice time when I really shouldn't be working actually. Bank holidays or public holidays as I think they're in the States, I'm always working because I kind of think it's like in my head I think okay, if I do this now I'll get ahead of it. Somehow I think this is extra. It's not expected of me. And if it's not expected of me, it seems to always be a little bit better. And I think in other areas, I think that's also kind of true that when we're not, it's almost like when you're trying too hard, you just can't. You're it's a bit like, I think there's an anarchic thing to being creative, which is if you're sitting down to be creative and you're able to be creative, that's great. But generally, I'm kind of going, I don't want to be doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
I'm making myself a prisoner of myself. Like I'm kind of going, I hate being told to do anything. I really, I've always been like that, and I hate it. So I'm kind of going, I have to sit here, I have to do this, and actually, the good stuff comes when I don't have to do it for
Yeah.
whatever reason, you know.
Yeah, and I also find like you can't really control it. Like once it comes, you have to kind of seize that moment and like really make the best of
Well,
it.
you do, and it's also why you never ever trust that you'll remember that idea. You have to write it
Mm,
down.
yep.
Because of course at the time you think, oh yeah, no, I'll always remember this. It's great, but it doesn't. I'm sure I've got a couple of. In fact, I remember I had a dream where I had the most beautiful melody, and in the dream it was going to change the world. The melody was so beautiful, and I don't know if it was just my dream that such a thing could exist, or if it actually existed. I'll never know.
Did you
And I
put it
couldn't
in
remember
a
it. I couldn't
film?
remember it.
Oh,
Couldn't
you
remember
couldn't.
when I no when I woke up. I couldn't remember it. But it definitely was one of those dreams where I was very aware that it was a dream and that this was a really hauntingly beautiful piece of music.
Well, maybe you unconsciously put it into something and you just
I
don't know.
don't think so because I'd know. I think I'd know. I
Mm.
think I think it was so beautiful. But this was only maybe it was somebody else's music. I don't know. But it was in there. But anyway, maybe it'll rear it. Yeah, it'll come out at some stage. I hope.
So, how would you describe what you do in your own words?
I would say I write music for pictures for film and television, and I come from a filmmaking background, so I do it in a way which is, I see myself as a much more as a filmmaker than a musician, um, and that's really helpful to me. It's really helpful to me to think like that. And I've had music played, like I've had music cues from Room and from various other things from a film I did called The Quiet Girl, which were have been performed by orchestras in concert halls and stuff. And I just find it bizarre. Like it's an amazing compliment, but I'm kind of going, it wasn't designed for this. It
Mm,
wasn't. I'm trying to think what it's like. It's a bit like I'm really grateful that people get a lot from the Normal People soundtrack. Especially like my daughter when she was studying for her exams, it came up on a Spotify playlist. And I remember her phoning me to tell me, she goes, Dad, your music came up on my, and I was just, that was really moving because she thought it was great. She thought I was great because I appeared on a Spotify. And she also said she really loved the music. And that was, that's everything. That means an awful lot. But it was never, I mean, to go back to what you said earlier about, I suppose, normal people in particular having a life outside of the music from normal people having a life outside of the film. I mean, the music is absolutely inspired by the characters and what they're going through. So I suppose even if people hadn't seen Normal People, it might contain some notional DNA of what that might be sympathetic or be the soundtrack to people who are going through something similar who never
hmm
saw something like that. It's a bit like, a reverse translation of it in some way. But I don't know. Like I've done several films where I still have to release the soundtrack, and I'm just really lazy about it. I just
Oh, on your Spotify, like your channels.
well, yeah. I like there's a film I did called I Swear, which is really good, and I own the publishing on it, and I just haven't. I keep meaning to, and it's easy these days. You just put it up. Like I've got a record company. my publisher's record company, and I just have to send the stuff to her, and it goes up, and I'm just really bad at it. At the same time, I know this is going to sound a little bit um, disingenuous, but I had no idea how Spotify worked because I promised years ago that I would never darken the door of Spotify. I hated it because it was playing people's music for nothing and it was stealing
Mhm.
music and whatever. And then the aforementioned daughter told me that I had something like 700,000 followers or monthly listeners or something. And I said, yeah, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean? She says, no, that's really good. And I said, well, how? Why is that good? There's a lot of people in the world. And then I started looking at other film composers, and I was so thrilled. I was kind of going, lots of guys have been nominated for Oscars and stuff, and I was going, oh, I've got 50% more than them or whatever. Now it's gone. And of course, then I became kind of quite interested in it. I'd be kind of looking at it every day, going, "Oh, today I'm worth whatever. Uh, Today I've got 700,000. It's a pity it wasn't dollars,
Right.
um, but now I think it's back down to about 250,000. I haven't checked, but what's funny is when exam seasons start again, the numbers go up because it goes onto playlists for studying. So it's
That makes a lot of sense to me.
makes a lot
Like
of
that.
sense. I'm not sure though if I'm not sure how great it is to be responsible for the music to study to. If I thought, anyway, that wasn't the intention.
But I
It's a
also
nice
bet it's
add-on
on
thing.
playlists for writers too, to
That would be
write to.
lovely. That would be
It's
lovely.
what I write to a lot.
Well,
Is
that's
that
that's
is that
that's
soundtrack?
great. So you don't write to the music from Frank, no?
No.
Have you seen Frank?
No.
Okay. Well, Frank is a whole other thing. Frank was a film that Lenny directed about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, with Michael Fassbender in it, where he wears
Mhm.
a big fake head. And I mean,
Oh,
it's
yes.
it's literally as big as my hands are doing here, and it's an absolute hidden gem, I think, because it's so in that film I had to write the music for the band as well. So that was a situation where I was in very early. Um, at the script stage because I had to write the music for the band. Then I had to teach the actors how to play because Lenny and I wanted to make sure that the band, when they appeared to be playing, were actually playing. Because
Mhm.
there's nothing I hate more and nothing more that will take you out of a film than when you see famous actor's head and then cut to the piano player's fingers, back to the head, and you never see the two, and or just bad lip syncing or whatever. So we we
Yeah.
we decided we were gonna make life really hard for ourselves and write original music that was both crap but beautiful. Sorry, crap. Do you understand what
Yeah,
crappy?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
crappy but beautiful, and then to be able to teach it to actors who we only Maggie Gyllenhaal is in it as well. Who we only had access to for a couple of weeks.
How did that go?
Lenny and I are really proud of what we did in that film because it was such a tough technical challenge, and to write weird art music that also has a certain kind of cachet, it was a real challenge. And then to do the score as well. But it's a lovely film. If you do get the chance, you should watch it.
I will definitely watch it. I actually just watched because I knew I was going to be chatting with you. I watched Conversations with Friends, which was I think
Hmm.
another Sally.
It was another Sally Rooney book, yeah. And that was an interesting. The producer of that was out here in my house the other day. We're talking because we're on another project, and we were just talking about conversations with friends and how it was so difficult after Normal People because I mean, basically the characters just aren't as nice. You're
Yeah.
kind of going. So she's in love with she's in love with another woman's guy, but she's also in love with her girlfriend, and it's all, and you kind of go, wow, just she's you just don't like, you just don't really like them. It's not like
Yeah.
Connell and Marianne, who are just an eternal story in a way. This felt a lot more, I suppose, decadent or just. And then at the very end, where she tells him to come and get me, I just never believed that.
I hated that part. I finished it yesterday and I was like,
Come on.
no.
What was that about? I was going, tell him to go fuck himself. Like, just whatever. I just kind of felt like it's from another thing. Come and get me, good looking hunk. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I just, anyway, I
Well,
think, it was very, it's very different. Look, again, I think it's really beautifully made. I think all that
mhm.
stuff. I have a feeling that in truth it was never ever gonna get close to normal people.
Yeah.
And I think it had a lot of similarities in the way it was made to normal people, but without the central beautiful story. And I think that's really what ultimately it's all about. It's about the story. It's about whether it's a story that people can identify with, want to be involved in. Um, it's always, even though I see myself as somebody who is not a film snob, but would watch a lot of, I suppose, European cinema and independent American, whatever. I still found it hard when my daughters forced me to watch The Notebook, not to get a little bit emotional, because it's just the story. The
Yeah.
story is amazing, and one of my favorite films is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the one with Gene Wilder, not the one with uh,
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp.
Yeah. That's a good one. The
Yeah,
original.
the
Yeah.
original one. Yeah, and again, it's just a beautiful story, and it's really well made. And it was kind of magical when I was a kid. I mean, it's funny how that stuff works. Still, one of the most horrifying and horror-filled scenes for me from all of film is the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Yes, me too.
Like, he is the creepiest mother of all time, and yet it's this weird camp children's story.
Yeah.
It's from the 1970s, and yet that I probably saw for the first time when I was a kid, but it stayed with me the whole. I guess it's like people being freaked out by clowns or something. But
It's this it still comes to my mind.
yeah,
Like it like
yeah,
regularly. It's very odd.
it is very odd, and also just that idea of a child catcher is now just as truly grim, really
Yeah.
grim. But yeah,
Um and I know you mentioned Lenny a few times, but you've been collaborating for 20, 30 years, like a long time, right?
40 maybe.
Oh wow. Wow.
Well, we went to school together when we met. We were in school together from when we were 9, and we were friends in school, and then we lived in a flat together in Dublin all through our 20s when we were trying to make stuff, um, and just trying to uh, be creative artist people in Dublin. Most of our friends and people we were in school or college with went away, either went to the States or went to London, and we stayed, and we were trying to, yeah, we just started off making short films. I directed, wrote and directed short film after Lenny had written and directed one, and it was supposed to keep going like that in a way. But then Lenny started making, he did a lot of TV commercials, which was really brilliant because you get to, as Lenny would say, you got to play with all the toys, all the really fancy, because the production values of ads of commercials back then were much higher than
Mhm.
film. If you think about, you know, 30 seconds of advertising would have a budget that would be maybe half what an hour and a half of film would be, or whatever,
Yeah.
for a big thing. So he got to shoot stuff on 60 mil. And he learned an awful lot of stuff, and he got me to do the music for most of the commercials. So I learned a whole lot of things because I learned how to loads of different styles, again, getting stuff over in a certain. So it's a brilliant way of learning. It's better in some ways, I would imagine, than film school because you are just, like I say, you're playing with all the toys. You're getting to play with all the toys, work out how they work, how does this, and getting paid for it.
Hmm.
And the getting paid for it is important just in being able to pay rent, being able to do that stuff so that you don't have to go and work another job as a waiter or whatever it would be. And
Yeah.
and I think it's a bit like, I'm very opinionated about this stuff, obviously. Like with architecture, I don't think architecture should be a university degree. I think it should be go back to being an apprenticeship. It should go back to being a skill that in your first year you work on a building site. So that as an architect you're going to learn about the materials. Whereas a lot of people go and study architecture having left school, they've never held a brick. They don't know that if you bend wood, if you do this to wood, it bends before it breaks, and depending on the wood. Whereas if you do this with a piece of concrete, it will break. If you do it with all of those things that are
Yeah.
just about understanding the materials that you're working with, which is also true with filmmaking. And it used to be that it would be celluloid and you'd have a Steenbeck, to cut on and all of that stuff. And that gave you a lovely feeling for how all these things went together. And I kind of miss that notion of an apprenticeship because I think it's when people really learn. I think to do the advice that I would give to anybody who wants to work in film, particularly composers, but maybe writers as well, is to go and work as a runner on a film set because you or to work with an editor, to sit with an editor as a composer or as a writer, you get such an appreciation of what they are going to start doing with the images that are being collected by the director and how music can influence that. But it gives you an understanding of film. And so if you're writing for film, if you're writing music for film, I think to be on set and then to spend time with the editor, probably more than anybody else, is where you're going to really learn because it's about, editing is about rhythm and pacing and shining a light on certain things and how they do that is really, this is good editors. Bad editors, well, I'm not sure how easy it is to discover bad editors because maybe it always depends on the material they get, I suppose.
Yeah. And also, I feel like sitting and understanding why they cut it the way they did. I mean,
Yeah,
just from a music perspective too, is probably invaluable.
yeah, it is, but more than anything else, I think it's also you begin to understand the collaborative nature of it, and that it is not no one thing is like it's just very easy. Certainly, when you're starting out, you're probably so insecure about your abilities or whether you're going to be able to get work or whatever that you're really focused on your contribution.
Hmm.
But your contribution won't ever really be appreciated until you accept that you have to stop trying to be really good at it. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's a bit like you have to kind of just it's like if you're trying to be the best boy or girl in the class, you're never going to actually be a really good student or something like that. I don't know what it is, but I know that it's a bit like when if you're ever trying to impress anybody, it just smells like you're trying to impress.
Yeah.
That's just how it is. And actually, you have to really be just trying to. Uh, do you know what it is? Your job is to solve problems. That's actually what it is. My job is to solve problems. Is to it's quite task oriented in that way. So I'm not starting going, I'm going to write a concerto which is going to make people weep in their seats and whatever, and they close their eyes and be transported. It's not. My job is very simply, he seems a little bit weak in this scene. What can we do to either shine a light on that? We want him to be weaker, or we want to distract somehow from that, or we want, while we're thinking he's weak, we want to have a memory of his father and how he actually got that weakness from his father, or whatever
Mm,
those things are. And then you have to go, I got to solve that problem
right.
in whatever way whatever it takes. Actually, that's kind of, which is why sometimes maybe it is the German tuba band that just happens to do that. And if I'm kind of going, oh well, Stephen Rennicks doesn't do German tuba bands, I've got my reputation to think of, then I'm failing, because my reputation should be based on how I make stuff work. And people in the industry will go, oh, that was a really tricky scene. It's amazing how he solved it with a German tuba band. I want him on my next project because he's going to, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like composing is so collaborative with the edit. I'm curious if your music has ever changed the pacing of a scene. Like, did has there ever been something recut because of the music? I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it has. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I mean, what often happens as well is I will send look, in a way, this is a good example of how unprecious it is. I will often send an editor, particularly Nathan, a cue for a particular scene. And then he will, at some stage, tell me, oh, yeah, no, I used that piece of music, but I used it over a completely different scene. It works really
Mm,
well. And part of me goes, oh, I'm shit at what I do because I should have known it would have been. And another part is going, fantastic, because it solved that problem in that scene. And I no
right.
longer have to worry about that scene. And what's lovely about that is when I see that scene with that music that I'd written for another scene, I then get an idea, because then I'll go, yeah, it does work really well there. And I'll get an idea of how the edit room, which would be Nathan and Lenny together in the edit room, are thinking about that stuff. I'm learning from how they're using my music. So in that way, it's not precious. It's not like Stephen wrote a piece of music for this scene, we have to use it for this scene, and it's not working. It's like if the material isn't tied down, they'll use it. And it has to be like that because you're scrambling to be creative, and you have there's a ticking clock, and it should be, there should be a kind of fever dream of trying to just get it all together no matter what it takes.
With your collaboration with Lenny, has your creative relationship evolved over the years from the very beginning short films to now? Like, how has that
Yeah,
changed?
it has. I suppose the biggest thing that's happened is we've probably both got more confident, um, and also, success is a lovely thing because it somehow makes you, when you hear that somebody likes something or you win an award or it just it just means that you must be doing something right and you must exist in some weird way. It's a bit like when my first child was born. I remember thinking, oh, I must really be alive because now I have a child and I need to stop staring at my belly button so much and actually start being present in the world or whatever.
Hmm.
And I think that, you know, as you become more established, I think that's a better way of putting it. Just more established as you work with more people, or people take you seriously, which is a lovely thing, that you walk into a room and you don't have to sell yourself, or you don't have to go, I've done this, I've done that. There'd be certain rooms I would go into now, and the first thing people would say would be, oh, I loved I Swear, or I love The Quiet Girl, or something that shows they know what you've done. Whether they're bullshitting or not is entirely up to them. But it just means that they have a reference point for you, I suppose. And that means you kind of go, okay, I guess I guess this is what I do now. I guess this is who I am. And so you relax with it. You relax with that idea that you have an ability that people are prepared to trust you with, which is lovely. Because when I was younger, I didn't think I had that. I thought everyone could sing. I thought everyone could write music, and you're just so, when you're younger, you're so concerned with trying to work out who you are, what you're, all of that stuff. And Lenny as well. It's like I've noticed Lenny as a friend just be much more confident in himself. It would never have been important, I would have thought, for Lenny to be Oscar nominated, because we would never have taken the Oscars that seriously. But it's still a huge compliment
Hmm.
to be Oscar nominated, because there's only five people every year or whatever it is. And you're kind of going, it's easy to say, "Oh, I don't care about the Oscars," when nobody's inviting you to the Oscars.
Right.
But when you do, it's like, I don't want to go to a party that's not inviting me to the party. But it's a lovely, it's those things are more important, I think, than you think they are when you're younger. And those
Mm.
things then give you a certain amount of just confidence in feeling established, so that when you have an idea, you will no longer either not say it or blurt it out. You will present it as something which may or may not be used. And you have the confidence to kind of go, well, if it's not being used, it's probably not that good. Now, if that happened a lot, if you had 10 ideas and 10 of them weren't used in a row, you'd start to get really scared again. Kind of
Yeah.
think, oh, okay, am I ever going to work again? Or, but I think also, Lenny, like our relationship has just evolved, because we both have kids. We're the godparents of each other's kids. Well, not godparents, but consiglieres in a way, because we don't. We're
Mm.
both avowed atheists. So there's a kind of, I don't know. Like, especially with Lenny, it's been a lovely, somebody who's like a dear, dear friend, to be able to also work with them and kind of, I suppose, share their success to some extent. Um,
Hmm.
has been really lovely. And we're about to start now on his next feature, and that's, it's daunting. It's really daunting, because again, I just really want to get it right. And as does he. And it's that feeling that, oh yeah, no, we've managed so far, we've done this. And also, some of the stuff that I did for Lenny's very early films were like Adam and Paul, and what Richard did or whatever. I was so free of concern or expectation that I want to try and maintain that freedom. Because when projects get bigger and the budgets get bigger, there just becomes the expectation that it's going to be an orchestral score or whatever, and it's to kind of go, no, we've got to do what's right for the film. So if it's harmonica, then it's harmonica. If the recording just involves one harmonica, then that's what we have to go with. Forget about production values. That's what's right for the film, and that's that gets harder to sell, because often for a lot of producers, their favorite part of the whole thing is the recording of the score, because they love to come in
Mm.
and sit in when the orchestra's playing, and it is really, it's enchanting. It's an amazing thing, but you shouldn't be doing it just so you can have a couple of days in the studio being serenaded by an orchestra. It has to be warranted.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, to go back to your statement about it being daunting, like it's interesting to hear you say that, just because you've done so many, especially with Lenny, but also it reminds me of, I don't know who said it, but it's like, if you're not a little bit anxious about the project you're doing, it's probably a bad sign. Like it's probably like you don't care enough about it. I don't know if you
Yeah,
feel that way.
I do. No, I absolutely do. And the way I think about it is, it's a bit like earlier I said, if I go into an edit suite and I immediately see a scene and I go, I know exactly what that needs, I'm kind of in trouble, because what I'm
Mm.
relying on there is just craft, is a kind of um, an expectation. This thing demands this kind of cue, and that's all you have to do. So you're not really engaging with it. And actually, the good stuff happens when you really engage with it. But to really engage with it, you kind of have to both make yourself really vulnerable and fragile in a way and prepare to make ridiculous mistakes in order to really get into the kind of the viscera of the scene. Because if you know what that scene needs, it's just a surface thing. It's like, oh, romantic scene, romantic music, how do you, whatever. But actually, to do something better than that, you have to really engage. And to really engage, I think you have to be anxious, because every time it's a bit like having a really serious conversation with one of your kids or your nearest and dearest or your boyfriend or your girlfriend. It's like really engaging. It's looking them in the eye and going, let's forget all the tricks we normally use to distract or to whatever. Let's just be really present. And I think always being really present, there's a certain amount of adjustment from the normal way we are during the day to really engage. And it's similar I think if you want to do something really, or your best chance of doing something really good is to try and get to that place when you're working. And it can be really uncomfortable and draining, like, because
Yeah.
listen, the amount of times that I'll just go, oh God, great, here comes an easy cue, here comes whatever. And I just have this thing going, oh no, don't. If you think it's easy, it's not. You have to engage, you have to. Like, it's a voice in my head going, you just have to. Because if you stop engaging, you're going to get lazy. If you get lazy, people won't want to work with you anymore. You're going to be shit. You're going to be crap. You're going to be old. You're going to have no friends. You're going to die alone. Yeah, whatever, whatever. All the stuff. So I think it's really healthy to have a certain amount of just going, look, while one is established or whatever, none of that. It's a bit like an athlete getting fat, I think sometimes they start to kind of believe their own or the nonsense. They fly too close to the sun or whatever. All the various stories that have been told, and I really think it's true. I think you have to just go. All I am is somebody who's good at doing this thing, and I've been really lucky. I mean, that's the other thing that's really important to say. I have been so lucky. There's loads of people out there who are so much more talented than me. I mean, my older brother is a brilliant musician, brilliant jazz pianist, brilliant drummer, but he doesn't have what it takes to do what I would do because he isn't. He's too gentle.
Mm.
He's not robust enough emotionally. If he was in a room and somebody said, "Yeah, this cue isn't working," he'd go, "Yeah, you're right. It's shit. I'm shit." He wouldn't just go, "Okay, I'll go and fix it. I'll do something else." And there's some of the things you need in filmmaking are to be really robust. If you're writing scripts for film, you have to be able to take criticism. If a
Mm-hmm.
producer goes, "We need another draft," and you're just going, "I haven't slept for a week writing that draft, and now I've got to do another one." You got to go, okay, you don't go, no, that's my, because nobody really cares. No, it's kind of like, yeah, yeah, I don't care if you didn't sleep for a week. We can't make this. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And, and, and that's why it's different. So if you're writing prose, poetry, whatever, the thing about writing scripts or writing music for films is that you're on the clock. People are paying you to do a certain thing. And that's what you're good at. That's what you have to be good at. Writing a script, being able to understand, like when you do a redraft of a script, you change it all up. You don't just change a couple of things. You have to. So I suppose it's about being robust, emotionally robust, and yet also being vulnerable. So it's those two things. Because if you're not vulnerable, you can't write the really good stuff. or you can't really get inside characters if you're not sensitive is a better word than vulnerable. And I hate when people use the word oversensitive, because to me it's a bit like saying too fast. I'm a really fast sprinter. Yeah, but you might be too fast. You go, how can you be? What do you
Right.
mean? What do you mean? You're sensitive, and you can be very sensitive, and that to me is a really good thing. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, film is a particular set of skills, I think.
Well, I mean, just to that point, like, how do you personally, like, obviously it's really important to take feedback and understand what the director wants, but how do you know when something is right to you versus redoing something? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you distinguish?
Yeah. So I've worked on a few, particularly TV things in the last few years, and TV. It's all changed with TV because now TV is such a more respected medium, and it kind of didn't used to be for some reason. And there's lots of really great stuff being made, and I've done a couple of things where I I would watch it. I would There would be very little um, temp score on it, and I would send off cues, and I would get this feedback where they go, "Yeah, we really love everything. Could you maybe make the third cue a little bit longer because we really like it?" And I'm going, "What evil shit is this? What? No pushback? No what? Like." I'm kind of going, how do you expect this to work if you don't? If you're telling me my first efforts are brilliant, what's that about? And now I didn't go looking for work. I didn't kind of go and say, no, no, I have to change it all. You're supposed to. That's not the game. It's a bit like, it's supposed to be like tennis. I'm used to doing 15 versions for Lenny, um, but the stuff was quite good. Because I remember watching it on TV afterwards, about a year later, and seeing it, and thinking, "Oh, that's whatever." But I sometimes I'll be asked to make changes, and I just don't agree.
Mm.
And a great example was, funnily enough, the final cue in Room, where uh, Ma is leaving with the little dude, and they've been back to visit Room, and they're coming out and they say goodbye to Room, and they say goodbye to everything, and then they start walking back along the yard of the house where she'd been kept captive towards a police car in the distance. And the camera jibs up and pulls back. And I had written a piece for that was much darker. That was
Mm.
really quite dark. That wasn't, I mean, it wasn't, it just was kind of going, these people have such a difficult life ahead. At some stage, he's going to know who his father was, that his father was this kidnapping rapist who kept his mother in a dungeon. And I just felt they had a really hard road ahead. And I remember Ed Guiney, the producer, and Lenny just saying, "Well, we think it needs to be kind of lighter. After all of that misery of the last hour and a half, we need to give the audience a bit of relief and whatever." And I said, "Yeah, but that's a bit Hollywood. It's a bit,
Mm.
and they're all going to live happily ever after." And I said, "Len, all your films end up with misery. They all end up with, something awful, or at least questions that's
Yeah.
open for the audience to kind of go, did they kill themselves? Whatever?" And this was the most optimistic thing. It wasn't, it was conversations. There wasn't, and it was also, we were under such time pressure because it had got into Toronto and we were right up against it, and we were in recording with the orchestra. So I had to write a piece overnight, get it to the the guy who did all the transcription for all the instruments for the orchestra, and I adapted a piece anyway, which is the piece that ended up being in it. Like, they win because they're the producer and the director, and it's my job to ultimately they'll decide, because Lenny and directors are curating the ideas given to them and the material. So I couldn't have a strop and kind of go, "How dare you not use this? You're completely wrong. Get somebody else to do your music."
Right.
You're kind of going, "Okay, yeah." For me, it's I didn't say it was a mistake. I was kind of going, "Look, this is not. I think this would be better. The overall film would be better if it was a slightly darker end." Needless to say, the film went on to be nominated for lots of Oscars and won the Audience Award at Toronto, and everyone cried where they were supposed to cry and whatever. But I still think, I still think that the film would be a slightly better film if the end was a little less, just, it was a bit more open-ended, I felt.
So even after watching it at TIFF,
Yeah.
you felt that way. Wow.
No, listen, the film was much more successful. I mean, for a
Hmm.
film to do as well as it did, considering what it was about,
Yeah.
and considering half the film is spent in this one room, in this awful situation, the film did extraordinarily well.
Hmm.
But it was no Titanic. I mean, in this, it just,
Right.
films like that can't be. So the fact that it got nominated for, and that was always my thing. I was kind of going, look, nobody's going to see this anyway. So why not just make it like, why not just, most of your audience are really miserable people anyway. So why not just give them what they want? No, I'm being a bit glib about it, but
Yeah.
it's the only one I can think of where there was any kind of disagreement, and
Mm.
and to be honest, everyone was so tired at that stage. I kind of thought, look, yeah, I'll write it. Do what you want. Do
Yeah.
what you want. I don't care. Um, so yeah, I can't think of many other times where I've never resented having to redo a cue. I've never
Right.
thought, and often what I'll do is I'll give people options, and I'll kind of go, look, in the mix, you can choose whichever one you want, because sometimes as well, I know it doesn't matter. They
Mm.
don't know it doesn't matter, but I know it doesn't matter. In that I'm going, whether it's this cue or that cue, they do exactly the same thing. And the reason I think I know that better is because I have seen a lot of the stuff less than the directors and the editors. And I think the
Yeah.
more you see it, the more desensitized you become with the material. And I also think I have this. It's quite. I know when a piece of music is doing what the director wants it to do, but sometimes a director will just like something else going on in the piece of music, and they're kind of breaking their own rules, and they kind of are falling in love a bit with the piece of music. And
Mm.
I'm trying to go, well, don't do that. Just go with the one that you fall in love with less, because it works better in the thing, and you don't want a nice melody because then that will take people out of the film. And it depends who you're talking to, who you can say that with. But and that's another thing you got to do. You got to be able to sit and chat to people and make friends with people in a way, because every director is different. Every director is more or less confident than the previous one, and it's nice to work with nice people. And it's um you have to be able to support the people you're working with, I think, emotionally as well. Not
Yeah.
be, look, the people, there's no space left for bullies and for people who shout and rant and kind of stamp their foot, which is great. It's really
Yeah.
great that there's, because there was, and I'm not saying that people, you can, sometimes you have to be forceful. If people around you are being lazy or just dialing the work in, you're quite entitled to go. You need to cop on. You need to deliver. You need to do what you're being paid for, whatever. But the kind of just the gratuitous bullying because people had more power than other people, I think is hopefully certainly not as prevalent as it was. Because I just think people just don't have to put up with it anymore. Certainly shouldn't have to.
Yeah. What do you think it is about creating music for film and TV that keeps you coming back to the next project? Because obviously it can be tumultuous. It's you're being vulnerable, you're being sensitive. Like, what is it about the process or the feeling that makes you come back?
I mean, the actual moments of real pleasure doing what I do are very few and far between. But it does happen. And I guess it's a bit like you know, when you run, a lot of the times when you run, it's grinding, it's painful, it's boring, it's whatever. And every now and then you just feel like you're floating in space and you just get this moment of elation. And it can be quite fleeting, but I suppose it's the chasing of that or feeling that it's possible. I think there's loads. It's there's probably a lot of answers to it. It's nice to solve problems. It's nice to please people. It's nice to live up to if people come and say they want to work with you and then you don't disappoint them or let them down, that's always a plus. If you don't mess up their film or whatever, and if they kind of go, yeah, there's just something nice. And I suppose with a film as well, it's your success is easily is gauged not is gauged by the director and the producer accepting your work and going, yeah, that works for me, that's great, or whatever. My success, a notion of success, doesn't come when the audience see it because the audience aren't paying me.
Hmm.
They're not the people I'm trying to please, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They're completely secondary. And it goes back to that thing about if I was writing music to please the audience, I'm not really doing my job properly. If I can do that as well, great, but it has to be secondary. I have to try and help the director tell his or her story. That's the most important thing. And and I come back and also just I it's what I do. I that's the weird thing. Like it took me till I was 50 to accept it's what I did because I still wanted to write and direct,
Hmm.
even though I hadn't written or directed for 15 years. I was kind of going, and I remember kind of going, I guess this is what I do now. I've won a BIFA, I've been nominated for this. I'm kind of going, it's going to be weird if I turn around and say I'm not really a composer. I've just been pretending. I'm kind of going, and that took a kind of adjustment because, and it's funny. I think it helped me in a way because I remember when Room was being feted in the run up to the Oscars, and Lenny was. I flew over for the week of the Oscars because Lenny wanted me to be at the Oscars, and I that week lots of people wanted to have meetings with me over whatever, and I was 50, and I was kind of going, yeah, whatever. And I remember it was Amy Amy thingy, and is it Elizabeth Cantillon or Catherine Cantillon? Basically, the two heads of one of the really big studios. They were getting ready to tour with Skyfall. They were heading off with the James Bond thing, whatever. And I remember, and everybody wants to get a meeting with the head of the studio. And she'd seen Room, she loved it. She met Lenny. She said, "Oh, I really love the music. Could I, whatever?" And somehow I ended up going into a meeting with her. And I remember every 10 minutes her PA would come in to tell her she had a kind of call, and she'd go, no, 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 it's okay. And I realized, oh, that's how it works here. That's the option in case She just needs an out to get out of this
Mm.
meeting. And we ended up talking about kids and teenagers and having teenagers and whatever, nothing about film. And she said, how come I've never heard of you before? And she said, like, you seem really unambitious. And I said, I know. I said, I think I am just really unambitious. I said, I, I don't even really want to be here. Like, I said, and I definitely don't want to be in LA. And she just started laughing. She was going, but she said, people come in and they're advertising themselves all the time. And you're kind of going, and I just said, look, it's the nature of it now. I can work from our, in the past, you had to go, if you wanted to work in film in the States, you had to be in LA or New York or whatever. And now you can dial it in from anywhere in the world. And also, I love living where I live. I just love living where I live. And I love working with the people I work, making independent films that actually might affect people in a good way, and making a film which you feel at the end of your life maybe will have been more positive, just not cynical stuff, to actually do and to be working every day thinking maybe the world is a little bit better in some weird notional way because of what I did today, rather than doing stuff which is just about exploiting people and exploiting whatever. And I don't mean that in a cheesy sentimental way. I don't like cheesy sentimental stuff, but it's about trying to do it. It's a lovely gauge to kind of think, I don't ever want to do a film that I wouldn't want my kids at some stage in their life to see,
Hmm.
or to kind of be ashamed. I love when my kids see films that I do and they go, wow, dad, that's, or my friend saw that and I was able to go, yeah, my dad did the music for that. Like, that's just wonderful. And also, a lot of it is very visual for me. Music is very visual. I kind of see it when I'm building a cue or a track. I see it in a way, I see it as in space in a way. So it's analogous, I think, to a lot of things. It's most analogous, I think, to architecture in some respects and to
How so?
building.
Yeah.
Well, there's something about, I have this thing about if I'm in a certain, so say in New York, because New York has got so many different areas, and I will just be on a street that looks almost like another street, but the feeling of it, the feeling that there'll be certain things, there'll be a particular shop or an old warehouse or fire escapes that somehow either freak me out or give me comfort.
Mm.
And I can try and work out what that is. It'll be because at the end of the street, there's a street light, which means that there's life at the end of the street. If there's no street light, it just goes into darkness, and that makes it. So just all these little visual cues so I have a very emotional response to spaces
Mm.
and sunlight and how sunlight falls on buildings and all that shadows and stuff. And in a way, music is quite like that. There's a sense of how you can, in a piece of music, you can have a light at the end of the street. And to go back to the room, the last cue in Room, for me, there shouldn't have been a light at the end of the street. It should have been darkness. The bulb should have been smashed by passing thugs in a previous, the day before, and the glass would be lying on the ground, and there would be no light where there should be light, and that gives you a sense of darkness and foreboding, and not wanting to go down that street. And music, for me, feels like that. You set stuff up to somehow, without making it like the Jaws music. It's easier to just somehow have these quite definite elements that start to play with the dark and the light. And then what you can do is you can kind of make one win out a little bit. And there's a lot of that in normal people,
Yeah.
of just instruments that kind of are all that, or certain things that are trying to fight each other as to whether it's optimistic or pessimistic. There's a kind of, and in a way, I think that's what most people's lives are, because so much of the time, that thing people say, well, are you a glass half full or a glass half empty person? I think most people are, well, it's half full. Oh, now it's half empty. Oh, now it's half full. Oh, it's half. That there's a duality, that you're constantly changing your mind about stuff. You're sitting out with friends. It seems like this is amazing, and then 2 seconds later, you're going, maybe they all hate me. And then it's, oh, I'm surrounded by love, and then you're going, but maybe it's not real, or whatever. There's a
Yeah.
constant conversation between the dark and the light, and I think that that is often music is too one or the other, too dark, too light. But most life for me happens in the grey. It happens in between those things, which is why I don't like that very reductive notion of a happy film or a comedy film, or because actually the really interesting stuff, and why it's why normal people, I think, was one of the reasons it was so successful, was very honest about often the mundanity of relationships,
Hmm.
that they don't have this beautiful arc. They sometimes are all jagged and all over the place, and there's 10 years between seeing somebody and then you meet them again, and it's so
I also think that's why that soundtrack works so well outside of the show, is because it's not telling you what to feel. Like, because it's in kind of that gray area, it allows the person listening to it to like figure out how they feel. You know what I mean? Like,
I
it's
do, I
very
do, I do, because
beautiful.
I think that was there's a neutrality to it,
Mm,
but it's a kind of spiky neutrality. It's not a mundane neutrality. It's actually, um, I I don't know. It's so much of the stuff which I respond to, whether it's writing or film, is about somehow extending, putting an arm around somebody and going, look, we're all fucked. Christianity would have it as original sin, that we're all sinful or whatever. I don't.
hmm.
But as humans, we're flawed. We have to be, and part of it is, sorry, is accepting, understanding that, and if you're not flawed, then you're really dysfunctional, because you then believe that you somehow think that you're anointed by God or something, and sorry, I all of this stuff. Look, and all of the conversation we're having now about other stuff other than music all bleeds into the music,
Hmm.
because you bring that stuff. So many times I'll be talking with directors, and we'll be talking about not the film at all. We'll be talking about people and the characters and people we met, or some great sporting event, or politics, or and that will lead you into a place of going, oh, that's the world we're in. That's the atmosphere we're in. There's fear. There's fear there of somebody to say something, in the room that might, in the scene, that there might be something, that there's a tension, or there's whatever. And ways of describing that. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm making you talk too long. I'm sorry.
Try stopping me. Um, Ways of describing that, there can be loads of ways, and different directors have different ways of doing it. And some
Mhm.
directors, the classic is directors who you meet and they kind of go, oh, yeah, I don't know anything about music. And you go, oh, yeah, sure. Because everyone knows what they like and they don't like. That's what it comes down to. So you can say, I don't know much about music, but I know who I listen to. And I
Yeah,
know and everyone knows about music. Everyone,
it's true.
everybody encounters music, and everybody. I don't listen to much music when I'm not. I listen to talk radio most of the time if I'm in the car, because
Mm.
I'm constantly listening to music, and I don't. So it's a tricky one when I hear, or when people say, "Oh, who do you admire, or who are your heroes in film?" Comes, I'm going, I don't. You know, I probably the first. I know you didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The first time I became aware of music and film in a big way was, apart from Hollywood musicals and stuff, was Morricone in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or in no A Fistful of Dynamite. which was a Sergio Leone film with James Coburn in it, where he plays an
Hmm.
Irish guy on the run. And for me, the weird thing about Morricone's stuff is his music is absolutely beautiful, but it's always bigger than the film.
Mm.
So for me, I don't know how good it is as film music. It's iconic music. It's stunning. It's beautiful. It's so Morricone-ish in its loveliness. But it always feels bigger than the scene. It always feels that when the music starts and swells, the characters shrink and the music takes over. And so it's a question I would have about, I don't know. I think he was an amazing composer, and I think he made films much better than they would have been without his music.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if I would have liked to have been the director of a lot of his films because like he became bigger as it went on.
Yeah.
When he started off, it wasn't like that, but certainly it became like that. And what's quite interesting as well is about some of his pieces, which I've heard or I've seen, they were performed in concert. It's quite funny because they're very obviously written for a scene in a film because they go they go and they swell and they soar up to this point, and then they can't go any more because that's the end of the scene. So they have to go back to the beginning, and it's just this feeling of, I can't remember which one it is, but it's and it's absolutely beautiful. But it's not written as a piece which goes somewhere into the next movement. So when it was being performed, they just loop it and start it again. And it's kind of going, there's the giveaway. The giveaway was it was written as a 2 minute piece for a scene and worked brilliantly over that scene, the end scene or whatever. So,
Yeah. Oh man, so
yeah.
interesting. I could talk to you for like 3 more hours, but I don't want to take up any more of your time. I have a last section called the final 5 takes. But before
Right.
I go into that, is there anything you wanted to share about specific projects or anything?
Um, God, I have to even try and remember what I'm working on. Well, no, currently the project I'm about to start is Lenny Abrahamson's next feature film, which is really exciting.
That is really exciting.
It's really exciting because also it's the first of Lenny's films that he's written himself. He
Wow.
wrote the screenplay, and it's really really great. And so yeah, I'm suitably terrified about that. I just finished a big TV series for Netflix, which I'm probably not allowed to say much more about it than that. And then I've got another big TV series which Lenny is directing, which he is now shooting. That so it's going to be a really busy spring between the feature film and the TV series. But apart from that, no, I have nothing to share about. Uh, Other than we've had a lovely summer here in Ireland, which is really great. And
Nothing except for incredible projects in the pipeline.
well, that is, and actually, yeah, I should be incredibly grateful for that. I am very grateful because such a kind of it's such a lovely thing to be able to make a living from doing what I do. And
Mm.
like I am constantly just, I suppose, aware of the privilege of it. And like I said earlier, just being lucky. If I think if Lenny hadn't been so successful, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing
Mm.
because I think I would have probably written, directed, and maybe ended up as a fairly average director or whatever. I don't know. Or
Right.
gone back to architecture or who knows? Who knows? But I think it was only the success of Lenny's stuff, and I just kept asking. My idea was always that I would, once I'd finished a thing, I'd work for 6 months, then I could write and direct for the other 6 months and whatever. And I just kept going from project to project. Suddenly, had no time, and luckily, my scripts never made it to
I'm
the
so glad.
to yeah, yeah.
Well, we wouldn't have this music if they did. So
Well,
I mean,
that's
it's
that's
pretty.
that's a lovely thing to say, but yeah. So thank you for saying that.
Of course. Okay, so these are the final five takes.
Okay.
Five final questions. The first one is kind of some context I set up is this is your last score you'll ever compose for a film or a TV show. Knowing that, how would you approach it differently, or how would you approach it the same way and kind of cherish more of the experience?
Wow. Wow. Um, how would I approach it differently? I suppose it would be like a condemned man's last meal in some ways, in that you'd probably try and savor every and start to really appreciate what you've been doing all this time, that you couldn't wait to get to the end of every project because then you'd have a break. You'd probably
Mhm.
start going, well, I'm finally going to get my break, and I hate the fact that I'm going to get a break. And I had all these years of enjoying this, and I didn't enjoy it because I was too up my own arse, whatever. And having a weird internal conversation like that, I suspect. I don't think I'd be able to come to any kind of very sweet resolution around it. I'd find some way of undermining all the good in it, and getting rid of any joy. And I, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, what's the best advice you've ever received about creating music?
I would say the best advice I've ever received was from a therapist years ago, who I went to after my father died and I was 40, and I was going to him for about 6 months, and he never said much. And I remember eventually kind of going, look, I'm doing all the talking here, and he said, yeah, he said, I'm just waiting for you to stop trying to prove how intelligent you are by doing all the talking, because he said, maybe you'll start to listen then. He said, I got you were intelligent after the first 10 minutes about 6 months ago. He said, but since that, you've just been coming in, paying me €120 an hour. He said, it's fine by me. And I had such a laugh about it. But it was that thing about, he was absolutely right. I wanted to let him know, okay, Mr. Therapist guy, I know what you're at. I know how you're going to try, and I'm not just somebody who you can take apart like that. And of course, he knew me in the first 10 minutes, but I wanted to, whatever. So the vanity, yeah, not to be vain around, I suppose it's a version of not to take yourself too seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be, like, sometimes you have to be serious, but it's a lovely thing as you get older and bits start falling off or whatever, that you just kind of go, God, in my 20s or 30s, I was so worried about how I appeared in the world, how I interacted with the world. And as you get older, it just becomes more real and more about the work and engaging very honestly, not having to be impressive or something like that. Being genuine is the most impressive thing you can be.
What's the worst advice you've ever received?
Probably very similar. Make sure make sure not to pay your therapist too much before he gives you advice. Um, the worst advice. I don't know if there is one, but there is a thing which is really worth doing, which is all those little sayings which hang around in your head for most of your life that you somehow think are true, to examine them. Like, don't don't judge a book by its cover is complete nonsense. It should be, don't always judge a book by its cover.
Hmm.
I mean, if the front of the book has a cross on it and says the Holy Bible, it's probably the Holy Bible inside. In which case, you're absolutely right to judge the book by its cover. But things like that, don't burn your bridges at both ends. Like, for every saying, there's an opposite one. The early bird catches the worm. There's got to be something that, and these things live in your head, and you sometimes just tap into them and go, oh yeah, I'm here first. The early bird catches the worm. And actually, you probably would have been much better off if you'd stayed in bed. There's
Yeah.
plenty of worms. No, but you know what I mean? There's this kind of, and,
Yeah.
and it's to ignore. So the worst advice comes from those little sayings. That's what I'm trying to get at. Because they're all, little pithy sayings are invariably nonsense.
It's good kind of like question everything.
Yeah,
Question.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, what is something you used to believe about film music early on that you've now changed your perspective on?
Oh, I probably used to think it was really hard to do, and I no, that's not really. Yeah, I think it's a version. It's a version of that where I used to think it was a lot harder, and actually, it's about. I now think really. It's about keeping it really simple, and that's in also which in some ways almost would lead you to think that I'm saying, look, anyone can do it, but I'm not saying that. It's actually to get to this stage where I feel that I had to go through all the other 30 years of getting to understanding the simplicity. And while I had the ability to do that when I was younger, I didn't have the experience or the wisdom in a way. Yeah, that's a bit of a kind of weird answer, but I think it's the best you're going to get.
No, that's great. Okay, final question. When someone watches one of your films decades from now or TV shows, what do you hope they feel because your music was there?
I hope they feel it was worth paying the 4.99 rental that they just, well, it won't be 4.99 at that stage. Um, God, that's a tough question. I don't know if I can answer because I don't. I suppose it would be nice if they kind of thought, who is he?
Hmm.
Who was he? Like, or if they heard something and they waited around to the end to see the credits and went, oh, who is he? Or it's a thing I do increasingly. I love now staying to the end to watch. Not I love. I feel I have to sit down and watch. It's a bit like people leaving a sporting event early. I'm kind of going. There's people out there risking their lives potentially in American football or baseball or ice skating or whatever, and you're worried about getting you the early bus home. And for all the people who work, it's why I hate on Netflix and all these things that it goes to next episode before they've played all the.
Credits.
And for some people, that's, often people are working on doing a deal on their fee because they get a credit and all this. And there's something about that. So, years to come, if they hung around to see who wrote the music because they liked the music and they went, who is he? That'd be nice.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and chatting for a while. I know I kept you over time, but
I didn't even notice. No, listen, it's been lovely, and look, I waffle and I go all over the place. So I hope you're going to be able to make something out of it.